Legal experts decry Ontario's terrible new community housing policy. The Ontario government's move to allow community housing providers to turn away prospective tenants who have been evicted from housing for committing a crime is raising alarm bells for lawyers and academics, who call the new policy disturbing and terrible. On September 23, the government announced the policy, which would impact people evicted for crimes such as drug trafficking, assault or property damage, touting it as a way to make community housing safer. Our government is sending a clear message that dangerous criminal activity is not welcome in community housing, said Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, in a statement. People shouldn't have to worry about their children's safety when they're playing right outside their front door, he added. Toronto Mayor John Tory thanked the provincial government for moving forward on this important change in legislation requested by the city. Through this new change, we are putting the safety of the vast majority of tenants in community housing first and sending a strong message to criminals who choose to threaten families and seniors in their homes, he stressed in a statement. According to a government release, more than 250,000 families live in community housing across Ontario, and the province has over 1,000 community housing providers. I understand the rationale behind it, which is we don't want to put other individuals who are in community housing at risk of serious criminality. I get that, but I think that a ban is the wrong way to go about that, she explained. SAD noted that some of the serious offenses covered by the policy are very broad, such as assault or trafficking of drugs. Drug trafficking can be done in a non-violent way. Assault could be serious, but it could also be wrong place, wrong time, caught some charges and are now dealing with them. I think that it's overbroad the crimes that someone could lose their housing for, she said, adding that it's important to keep in mind that people in community housing have limits on their income. These aren't the most well-off people in society, and we also know that poverty can be a contributing factor to criminality. And we also know that when someone's housing is taken away, that puts them in a, necessarily, more desperate position. It can fuel addictions and it can fuel other antisocial behavior that otherwise may be mitigated by the stability that housing provides. So, taking all of that into account, plus the context of the current rental market in Ontario, which is not welcoming to tenants and which requires even normal people to jump through many hoops to prove employment, prove income, prove credit, provide a criminal record check, it's just making it extra difficult for people to get their lives back on track. I am disturbed by the policy, she said. Rather, they may have been found to have committed illegal activity by the Landlord and Tenant Board under S61(1) of the Ontario Residential Tenancies Act and evicted on that basis, but that is a separate legal process with a lower standard of evidentiary proof than what the criminal justice system requires to find someone guilty, he explained, adding that regardless of that, this new policy is terrible. For many residents, eviction from community housing means that they have nowhere else to live because they simply cannot afford to pay market rent. Simply because someone may have committed illegal activity in the past does not mean that they will commit illegal activity in the future. Housing rights are human rights, not privileges. This means that housing rights should extend to everyone, including people who may have committed illegal activity in the past. They have a right to safe and affordable housing in Ontario like everybody else, he stressed. Del Gabo said the policy will lead to increased homelessness and the criminalization of poverty in Ontario. Many residents of community housing cannot afford to pay rent on the open market. This means that if community housing providers are allowed to turn away people who may have committed illegal activity in the past, many of these people will have nowhere else to turn for shelter and support. Many will be rendered homeless and forced to live on the streets, where they will continue to be targeted and policed by law enforcement, he added, noting that police services in Ontario are poorly equipped to contend with the complex issues facing people who experience poverty and homelessness, many of whom are racialized and experience mental health challenges. Additionally, the problem of housing discrimination against historically marginalized groups, including people who are racialized and experience mental health challenges, remains prevalent in Ontario. This policy will further stigmatize these individuals and render them more vulnerable to unlawful housing practices, he said, adding that the policy should be scrapped. Residents who were previously evicted for illegal activity should not be denied access to community housing in the future. Instead, community housing providers should be funded and supported in their efforts to build safer and more inclusive environments for everyone who needs affordable housing. Local community building initiatives, job placement services, mental health supports and other social programs aimed at homelessness prevention should be made a top priority at all times, Delgado explained. Residents who were previously evicted for illegal activity should not be denied access to community housing in the future. Instead, community housing providers should be funded and supported in their efforts to build safer and more inclusive environments for everyone who needs affordable housing. Local community building initiatives, job placement services, mental health supports and other social programs aimed at homelessness prevention should be made a top priority at all times, Delgado explained. Julie O'Driscoll, Director of Communications for the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, said that last fall, the City of Toronto asked the province to amend the Housing Services Act, 2011. They wanted housing providers to be able to prevent tenants who have been evicted for serious criminal activity from returning to community housing if they posed a threat to the community, she explained, stressing that now housing providers have the discretion and flexibility to turn away prospective tenants who were previously evicted for committing certain criminal activities. This is another tool that some service managers asked for and told us would help address criminal activity. Our priority is keeping communities safe, she added.